For 30 years, a man in a horror movie mask terrorized banks across the East Coast. Over 50 robberies, $2 million stolen, 0 arrests. His name was Carl Gugasian, and he had a master's degree, special forces training, and a spreadsheet for everything. Let's talk about how America's most prolific bank robber turned crime into a science, and how 2 kids playing in the woods accidentally ended his 3-decade run. Picture this: February 7th, 2002. FBI agents knock on the door of a modest apartment in Radnor Township, Pennsylvania. The man who answers is 55 years old, balding, unremarkable. He's wearing reading glasses. Behind him, they can see textbooks on his shelf. When they tell him he's under arrest for bank robbery, he doesn't run. He doesn't protest. He just nods, like he's been expecting this conversation for a very long time. And in a way, he has, because Carl Gugasian has been preparing for this moment since he was 15 years old. Let's go back. October 12, 1947. Carl Gugasian is born in Broomall, Pennsylvania. We don't know much about his early childhood, but we know how his teenage years went. Because at 15, young Carl decides to rob a candy store. Not a bank, not a jewelry shop, a candy store. And it goes about as well as you'd expect a 15-year-old's first robbery to go. Someone shoots him. He gets arrested. And instead of going home with a stern warning and a juvenile record that would disappear when he turned 18, Carl gets sent to the state youth facility at Camp Hill for 18 months. Now here's where the story gets interesting. See, Carl doesn't know something crucial. He doesn't know that juvenile records get expunged. Years later, FBI agent Ray Carr would say this: he didn't know that juvenile records get expunged. He thought he'd never be able to get a real job. Think about that for a second. A kid makes one stupid mistake, gets shot for it, spends 1.5 years in juvenile detention, and walks out convinced his life is essentially over before it's begun. No college, no career, no legitimate future. So Carl makes a decision. If society has already written him off, he's going to become the best criminal he can possibly be. But here's the thing about Carl Gugasian. He's not your typical criminal. When he gets out in 1964, he doesn't immediately go back to robbing candy stores. Instead, he enrolls at Villanova University. He studies electrical engineering. He joins ROTC. After graduation, he serves in the U.S. Army at Fort Bragg, where he receives special forces and tactical weapons training. Then he goes back to school. He earns a master's degree in systems analysis from the University of Pennsylvania. He even does doctoral work in statistics and probability at Penn State. Oh, and in his spare time, he becomes a 3rd-degree black belt. And he takes up ballroom dancing, hitting the dance floor a few times a week. So, we've got a guy with special forces training, advanced degrees in engineering and statistics, martial arts expertise, and apparently pretty good footwork on the dance floor. And he's using all of this to prepare for a career in bank robbery, because that's exactly what Carl is doing. While he's studying probability and statistics, he's also planning mock bank robberies, 8 of them, in meticulous detail. He's running the numbers, calculating the odds, mapping out escape routes. But there's a problem. He can't pull the trigger, so to speak. 8 times he plans a robbery. 8 times he backs out, until 1973. Carl flies to North Carolina. He steals a car, and finally, after 8 failed attempts, he walks into a bank and commits his first robbery. He's 26 years old, and he's just discovered his calling. Now, let's talk about how Carl Gugasian turned bank robbery into a science, because that's really what he did. Most bank robbers are opportunistic. They need money, they walk into the nearest bank, they demand cash, they run. High risk, low planning, usually caught within a few robberies. Carl approaches it like he's writing his dissertation. First, the target selection. Carl doesn't just pick random banks. He goes to the library and studies topographical maps, street maps. He's looking for a very specific combination of factors. Small-town banks, close to wooded areas. On the other side of those woods, a road with easy access to a freeway. He narrows it further. He wants banks with late closing times, and he only works in autumn and winter when darkness falls earlier. Every single variable is calculated. Once he's selected a target, the surveillance begins. Carl doesn't just show up and rob the place. He spends days in the woods, watching. He's noting employee habits. When do they arrive? When do they leave? How many customers are typically inside at different times? What's the parking situation? Where are the sight lines? He's building a complete picture of the target environment. Then there's the timing. Carl has a rule: Friday nights, and always just before closing time. His reasoning? Maximum cash on hand from the week's business, minimum customers in the building. He's thought about this. Every bank robbery is an equation with variables, and Carl is minimizing risk while maximizing reward. Now let's talk about the costume. Carl doesn't wear a ski mask or pantyhose over his head. He wears horror movie masks. We're talking Freddy Krueger type stuff, grotesque, terrifying faces, but he modifies them. He makes sure they fit snugly against his skin so no one can see what color it is. He wears bulky clothing to hide his true build. And here's a detail that shows you how deep his planning goes. When he enters the bank, he moves in what witnesses describe as a crab-like manner. Side to side, unpredictable. Why? To make it difficult for witnesses to accurately estimate his height. The robbery itself is choreographed like a dance. He bursts through the door, moving fast and erratically. When he reaches the counter, he doesn't walk around it. He vaults it in a standing jump. Then he lands with a massive crash on the other side. The noise, the mask, the sudden violence of the movement. It's all designed to terrify, to create chaos, to make it impossible for anyone in that bank to think clearly enough to be a hero. He stuffs money into his bag. The entire robbery takes less than 2 minutes, sometimes as little as 90 seconds. Then he's gone. But the escape? The escape is where Carl's military training really shines. He runs into the woods, the same woods he's been surveilling from for days. He's already wearing scent-blocking material to confuse police dogs. In the woods, he's got a dirt bike waiting. But he doesn't just ride the bike to safety. First, he stashes the money and all the evidence in a cache he's prepared beforehand. A PVC pipe, sealed, hidden. The heat's on right now. He'll come back for it in a few days. Then he rides the dirt bike several miles through the woods to the other side, where he's got an anonymous-looking panel van parked. He loads the bike into the van, and by the time police are setting up roadblocks and searching for getaway cars, Carl is already on the freeway, looking like every other contractor heading home for the weekend. Oh, and those caches? Carl has 18 of them scattered across the Northeast. 18 separate bunkers, each containing different elements of his operation. Maps, masks, weapons, ammunition, surveillance notes, food supplies. It's not just about hiding evidence, it's about operational security. If one cache is discovered, it doesn't compromise the others. Let's talk numbers for a second. Over 30 years, Carl robs more than 50 banks. His take? Over $2 million. For 3 decades, the FBI knows someone they call the Friday night bank robber is operating. They can see the pattern. They know it's one person. But they don't have a suspect. They don't even have a lead. Because Carl never deviates from his system. He never gets greedy. He never gets sloppy. He's not robbing banks every week. Sometimes months go by between jobs. He only strikes when conditions are perfect and when he needs money. He's living in a decent apartment in a Philadelphia suburb. Not flashy, not drawing attention. Just a quiet guy with some technical skills and an interest in martial arts and ballroom dancing. But here's the thing about Carl's rationalization. He tells himself there are no victims. Banks have insurance. The money gets replaced. Nobody gets hurt. It's just him against the system, using his intelligence to beat an impersonal institution. And for a long time, that's almost true. Almost, because Carl does carry a gun, and on at least one occasion he uses it. A bank manager gets startled when Carl enters. The manager leans forward, maybe making a move, maybe just reacting. Carl shoots him in the abdomen. The manager survives, but the no-victim narrative is shattered. And then there's February 19th, 1981. Fulton Bank in Susquehanna Township, Pennsylvania. It's a Friday night. Carl's doing his usual thing. But this time, when he exits the bank, Sergeant Robert Bo McAllister of the Susquehanna Township Police has responded to the alarm. There's a confrontation. Gunfire. Carl shoots McAllister multiple times. McAllister returns fire. Carl escapes into the woods. McAllister survives. But here's the thing. McAllister doesn't just survive. He lives with those bullets in his body for 38 years. Multiple surgeries. Constant pain. And on January 20th, 2019, Bo McAllister dies from complications related to the shooting. The medical examiner rules it a homicide. Carl Gugasian, by this point already in prison and released, is officially a murder suspect. But the statute of limitations has long since expired on the shooting. There will be no charges, no confession, just the knowledge that one of Carl's victimless crimes resulted in a decorated police officer suffering for nearly 4 decades before dying from his wounds. But in the moment, in 1981, Carl gets away. He always gets away. Year after year after year. He's untouchable, a ghost who appears on Friday nights and vanishes into the woods. The FBI is stumped. Local police departments compare notes and realize they're dealing with the same guy, but they've got nothing to go on. No fingerprints at scenes, no DNA, no witnesses who can provide useful descriptions. Just a horror mask and a crash and a crab-walking figure who's gone before anyone can react. And Carl? Carl is meticulous about operational security. He's got 37 binders of surveillance logs at his apartment, spreadsheets calculating police response times, topographical maps with timing circles drawn on them, showing him exactly where he needs to be at what point in his escape to stay ahead of law enforcement. He's treating this like a military operation, because in his mind, that's exactly what it is. He's found the one thing he's genuinely excellent at, and the fact that it's illegal is almost beside the point. This is what happens when you take someone with special forces training, advanced education in systems analysis and statistics, and convince them at 15 years old that they'll never have a legitimate career. They optimize. So how does it end? How do you catch someone who's this careful, this disciplined, this intelligent? The answer is you don't. Carl Gugasian doesn't get caught. He gets unlucky. It's 2001. 2 teenage boys are playing in the woods near their homes in Radnor, Pennsylvania. They find a concrete drainage pipe, and inside it, PVC pipes. Being teenage boys, they open one up. Inside, not drugs, not treasure. Detailed robbery plans, maps with banks circled, notes on employee behaviors, cleaning instructions for a Beretta pistol, Halloween masks. The boys take this to the police, and suddenly, after 30 years of chasing a ghost, the FBI has a lead. They come back with a search team. And what they find is extraordinary. This isn't just a hiding spot. It's a bunker, brick-lined, professionally constructed. Inside are 5 guns, 500 rounds of ammunition, 8 Halloween masks, detailed notes on 160 banks spanning from Virginia to Connecticut, survival rations, and a brochure from a local karate studio. That brochure? That's the thread that unravels everything. FBI agents go to the karate studio. They talk to the owner, and they ask a very specific question. Do you know anyone who matches this profile? Short, athletic, probably between 48 and 52 years old, interest in statistics or systems, comfortable with weapons, good with numbers, and the owner doesn't even hesitate. Yeah, he says, that sounds like Carl Gugasian. He's a 3rd-degree black belt, trains here regularly, lives right across from those woods. February 7th, 2002. The knock on the door. Carl opens it. He sees the FBI badges, and according to the agents, he doesn't look surprised. He looks relieved, because here's something we haven't talked about. For 30 years, Carl Gugasian has been living a double life. On one side, he's the quiet engineer, the ballroom dancer, the guy who helps people with their taxes because he's good with numbers. On the other side, he's the Friday night bank robber, a criminal who's committed more bank robberies than Jesse James, John Dillinger, Bonnie and Clyde, and Willie Sutton combined. That's not an exaggeration. Carl Gugasian is by any measure the most prolific bank robber in American history, and he's been carrying that secret alone for 3 decades. So what do they find at Carl's apartment? Remember those bunkers? They find documentation, 37 binders of surveillance logs, maps marked with precise timing calculations, spreadsheets showing gaps in police response patterns, and money. $140,000 in vacuum-sealed bundles. They also find records of a Swiss bank account where Carl has been methodically depositing his earnings. This isn't some desperate criminal grabbing cash to feed a drug habit. This is a professional conducting a long-term operation. At this point, Carl does something interesting. He cooperates completely. See, most of his robberies are beyond the statute of limitations. They can only charge him with 5 banks. but Carl confesses to dozens more. He walks investigators through his methodology. He explains his planning process. He details his escape techniques. And the FBI realizes they've got something valuable here. This isn't just closing cold cases. This is a masterclass in what a disciplined, intelligent criminal can accomplish. The prosecution wants to throw the book at him. They're asking for 115 years. But Carl's cooperation cuts that down to 17 and a half years. And the deal includes something unusual. Carl agrees to appear in an FBI training video that will be distributed to law enforcement academies across the country. The most prolific bank robber in American history is going to teach the next generation of FBI agents how he did it so they can catch the next guy faster. But before sentencing, there's a hearing. And this is where Carl has to face some of his victims. Dawn Bressler, a bank manager who was working during one of his robberies, confronts him directly. She says, "Carl, the last time we met you were hiding behind a mask." She talks about the trauma, the fear, how it changed her life. And Carl submits a one-page letter to the court. In it, he writes something that suggests he's finally, after 30 years, understood what he's done. He says he always rationalized his conduct by believing bank robberies had no victims. But now he realizes that everyone who endured the experience suffered tremendous harm, even though they weren't physically injured. It's not clear if this is genuine remorse or just a tactical move to reduce his sentence. Maybe it's both. But what is clear is that Carl Gugasian, the systems analyst, the guy who calculated every variable in his robberies, never calculated the human cost. Or if he did, he decided it was acceptable, until he had to look those people in the eye. Carl serves his time at the Federal Correctional Institution at Fairton, New Jersey. And true to form, he finds a way to optimize his situation. He teaches mathematics to other inmates. Calculus, statistics, the same skills he used to rob banks, he's now using to help people earn their GEDs. And on May 5, 2017, at the age of 69, Carl Gugasian walks out of prison a free man. So where is he now? We don't know. He's not making media appearances. He's not writing a book. He's just gone. Maybe that's fitting for a man who spent 30 years being a ghost. But let's talk about what Carl Gugasian's story means, because it raises some uncomfortable questions. First, there's the question of wasted potential. Here's a guy with the intelligence and discipline to earn multiple advanced degrees, serve in special forces, master martial arts, and execute a 30-year criminal operation without getting caught. What could he have accomplished if that 15-year-old kid had known his juvenile record would be expunged? If someone had told him, "You made a mistake, but your future isn't over"? Would we be talking about Carl Gugasian, the engineer who revolutionized something? Carl Gugasian, the professor? Instead, we're talking about Carl Gugasian, the bank robber. There's also the question of how a misunderstanding can shape an entire life. Carl genuinely believed he was shut out of legitimate society, and that belief became self-fulfilling. He decided he was a criminal, and then he became the best criminal he could be. It's almost tragic in its own way. The system failed him at 15, not by being too harsh, but by not explaining the rules clearly enough. And that failure cost dozens of people their sense of security, cost one police officer his life, and cost Carl himself 3 decades of looking over his shoulder. And then there's the question of genius versus luck. Was Carl Gugasian a criminal mastermind, or was he just methodical enough and lucky enough to avoid capture for 30 years? The truth is probably somewhere in between. Yes, he was incredibly disciplined. Yes, his planning was meticulous, but he also got lucky. He got lucky that none of those 18 bunkers was discovered earlier. He got lucky that the karate studio brochure didn't lead police to him in the 80s or 90s. He got lucky that DNA technology wasn't as advanced in his early years. In the end, it wasn't brilliant detective work that caught him. It was 2 kids playing in the woods. There's a certain poetry to that, actually. Carl spent 30 years outsmarting the FBI, evading police departments across 5 states, staying 3 steps ahead of law enforcement. And what brought him down? Pure chance. A random discovery by 2 teenagers who had no idea what they'd found. All that planning, all that discipline, all those spreadsheets and timing calculations and backup plans. And it ended because some kids opened a pipe in the woods. Since his release, Carl Gugasian has faded into obscurity, but his legacy remains. The FBI still uses his training video, law enforcement academies still study his methods, and criminologists still debate what his case reveals about the intersection of intelligence, opportunity, and moral reasoning. His story even influenced popular culture. The bank robbery methods used in the movie The Place Beyond the Pines were directly based on Carl's techniques. The dirt bike through the woods? That's straight from the Gugasian playbook. And what about Officer Bo McAllister? His family spent 38 years watching him deal with chronic pain from those bullet wounds, multiple surgeries, reduced quality of life. And when he finally died in 2019, they had to live with the knowledge that his death was ruled a homicide, but there would be no additional justice. The man who shot him was already convicted of other crimes. The statute of limitations had expired. There would be no murder trial, no closure. Just the bitter recognition that one of America's most successful criminals had left behind victims who suffered long after his robberies stopped making headlines. So what's the lesson here? Is it that crime doesn't pay? Well, Carl walked away with $2 million over 30 years. That's not a fortune, but it's not nothing. He lived free for 3 decades, did 17 years, and got released at 69. In purely financial terms, you could argue he came out ahead. But he also lived those 30 years looking over his shoulder, never able to enjoy his success openly, never able to form close relationships, because who could he trust with his secret? And now he's out, but he's a convicted felon, a famous one, the most prolific bank robber in American history. That's not exactly conducive to starting over. Maybe the real lesson is simpler. Maybe it's that a single misunderstanding, a single failure of communication, can send a life spiraling in a completely different direction. Carl Gugasian at 15 didn't need to become a criminal. He needed someone to explain the system to him, to tell him he still had options. Instead, he spent 50 years proving he could beat a system he thought had already beaten him. And maybe, just maybe, the lesson is that being really good at something doesn't make it right. Carl Gugasian was brilliant at bank robbery. He applied genuine skill, intelligence, and discipline to his craft. But at the end of the day, he spent 17 years in prison, left behind traumatized victims, and contributed to the death of a police officer. That's not success. That's just tragedy with better planning. Carl Gugasian is 77 years old now, assuming he's still alive. Somewhere out there, the Friday night bank robber is living out his remaining years, carrying the knowledge of what he did and what he could have been. And honestly, we might never hear from him again. Because if there's one thing Carl Gugasian has always been good at, it's disappearing into the background. The question is whether he's at peace with what's left when the mask comes off.